We've all heard incredible stories of mythical characters that seemed too amazing to be true. But surprisingly, now we have proof that some of these legends are actually true, proving that truth can be stranger than fiction. The Old Man of Storr. Far to the north in the Scottish Highlands is an island called the Isle of Skye. It's a beautiful place that makes you feel as if you've been teleported into a vast and empty landscape that was once ruled by giants. There are mountains, fairy pools, and rolling fields that stretch into the horizon. Amidst this wild landscape is a geological feature called the Old Man of Storr. At the peak of a stubby mountain is a column of stone that pierces the sky. Although it looks like an ordinary rock, legends from the 10th century say otherwise. Ancient people in Britain associated almost everything they saw with magic. They didn't have a scientific explanation for volcanoes and glaciers, or any other natural phenomena for that matter, so they attributed what they saw to magic and the paranormal. Many of the simplest explanations involved giants, fairies, and a magical realm that's parallel to the physical world. People believed the Old Man of Storr was a real giant trapped in a shell of rock. The story of how he got there is one of the least dramatic legends you've ever heard. A great giant was once walking across the barren landscape, but suddenly he fell over and died. That's it. That's the whole thing. The earth gradually covered the giant's body until he was completely buried. The Old Man of Storr, the pillar of rock, is said to be one of his fingers sticking up from the mound he's buried under. Another version of the story is a little more vulgar, with people saying it isn't his finger, but something else. But first, it's shout-out time! I want to give a big thank you to Chicken to Jail for the generous super thanks. Thank you so much! We wouldn't be here without you. If you are new here, be sure to hit that subscribe button and join the Origins Explained family. Milo of Croton. There was a wrestler in ancient Greece named Milo of Croton 2,500 years ago. Legend says that he was the strongest man who ever lived. Milo was a real-life Hercules. At least that's what the stories seem to suggest. Milo hailed from Magna Graecia, which is currently in Italy. In 540 BC, he won the boys' wrestling championship. Then he won 5 Olympic Games in a row, beating every other man as easily as you might wrestle a newborn baby. He dominated the Olympic Games, the Isthmian Games, the Nemean Games, and every other tournament that would let him compete. But how did Milo get so strong? Do you think he had a rigorous workout routine? Or was he imbued with the power of the gods? If you guessed that he gained his strength by lifting a calf on his shoulders every day, you are 100% correct. Milo's strength-building strategy started with him hoisting a young calf onto his shoulders. He did this every day until the calf became a fully grown bull. Milo was so strong, he could lift an adult bull over his shoulders like it was nothing. He also supposedly ate 20 pounds of meat, 20 pounds of bread, and 18 pints of wine every single day. Modern scholars are torn over the legitimacy of Milo of Croton. The records seem to suggest that he did win a crazy number of wrestling matches. He was likely a real person with really incredible strength, but it's doubtful that he could actually lift a whole bull over his head. It's unclear when exactly he died, but Milo's legend says that he got his arm stuck in a tree and was eaten alive by wolves. The Demon in the Stone. In Japanese legend, the Sesho Seki is a very powerful stone. It's casually known as the Killing Stone, and it's said to hold the spirit of an unstoppable demon. Those who touch the stone are said to befall great misfortune, most often dying prematurely and under dubious circumstances. But that stone just shattered, and in its wake, it unleashed a storm of superstitious paranoia in Japan. It also supposedly unleashed an evil spirit that's ready to seek revenge. The spirit previously contained inside the stone belonged to an evil 9-tailed fox. The fox used to take the form of a beautiful woman named Tamamo no Mae. She plotted to kill the emperor, but was thwarted by a hero. The hero trapped her spirit within the stone, which was then left near the mountains in Nasu. It's unclear when all of this happened, as the story has been passed down through countless generations. But it wasn't until 1957 that the stone became registered as an official historical site. When tourists arrived to see this stone on a weekend in 2022, they were shocked to find that it had split in half. The local tourist information center said that the rock likely split because of rain and freezing temperatures. But there are those who fear that the spirit of the evil fox escaped her eternal prison, splitting the stone with her own power. Whether the legend is true or not, some people are spooked. Are you superstitious? Let me know in the comments below. The Great Flood. Plenty of people are familiar with the myth of Noah and the biblical flood, but what most people don't know is that a very similar myth exists in Chinese legends. It's known as the flood myth of Gun Yu. And just like the flood myth from the Bible, there is a strong possibility that it was a real historical event. There are a few different versions of the myth, but the most popular involves the Yellow Emperor, one of the most mysterious figures in Chinese lore. The Yellow Emperor ruled China about 4,400 years ago. And to give you some perspective, this was around the time that the Great Pyramids were being constructed in Egypt. The emperor had a grandson by the name of Gun. Gun stole some of the emperor's magical soil, which was used to soak up water spilling out of rivers and flooding crops. An enormous flood had destroyed China, sweeping away houses, killing people, and ruining harvests. Humanity wasn't wiped out, but the landscape was severely damaged by the water. Gun used the magical soil to help people, but the Yellow Emperor found out and grew angry. He had Gun killed for his thievery. Then Gun's son, Yu, pledged his loyalty to the emperor and asked politely to use the magic dirt. The Yellow Emperor gave him some dirt. Then, with help from a magical tortoise and a dragon, Yu rerouted river waters, dug canals, and made artificial lakes. This take on the flood myth is interesting because it isn't some great event caused by an angry god. It appears to detail something that actually happened and needed to be fixed. There's no consensus on whether a flood swept across the world. However, many experts agree that for the flood myth to be so commonplace in every culture, there was likely some sort of flooding. The Chinese myth is one of the only examples of a legend that doesn't dramatize the flood as a world-ending event. The Vanished Island. The Solomon Islands can be found in the western South Pacific Ocean, and the people of these islands tell a story that's not completely unlike the legendary tale of Atlantis. This story has been whispered from ear to ear for generations. They say that an island full of people was completely swept into the sea one day and destroyed. It's a legend that scientists think really happened. This is a true Atlantis-type story. Legend says that upon the island of Theane, there was a beautiful woman who was tired of her husband. She lived on Theane, but her husband was from a different island. She grew sick of his nonsense and left him for another man. Upset and heartbroken, the man sought help from a shaman. He purchased a wave curse, which would allow him to summon a tremendous wave and drown everyone on his ex-wife's island. Then he passed by the island in his canoe and said the curse, and that was it. The next day, the scorned husband climbed to the highest hill he could find on his own island to watch the destruction of Theane. And sure enough, a series of enormous waves crashed over the island until it was no more. It sounds like an old wives' tale, and maybe parts of it are fantasy, but scientists know exactly where Theane once was. It was a real island that was located between the islands of Ulawa and Aliite. Lark Shoal marks the exact spot where Theane previously stood above the water. Scientists suspect that it was lost to the waves by tectonic activity hundreds of years ago. The island's destruction likely wasn't due to a man who was left by his wife and got sour about it, but there's a real possibility that the island sank abruptly and everybody on it drowned. Kinrara's eruption. The Kinrara volcano in Australia blew its top 7,000 years ago. This was confirmed by a team of scientists from the University of Glasgow and a handful of other institutions. Scientists used rock dating techniques to mark the exact era in which the eruption took place. And the reason I'm telling you this is that for the past 7,000 years, Aboriginals have been telling stories about what happened on the day of the eruption. But until now, the stories were dismissed as silly legends. The legend has been passed down through 230 generations, so it's likely changed several times over the years. The most comprehensive version is that there was a great explosion of fire and smoke. It was so intense that people became lost in an impenetrable cloud of dust and toxic gas. They died in that horrible dust cloud, while the earth bled fire in epic rivers. It sounds a lot like a description of a volcanic eruption. Scientists suspect that the volcanic lava spewed from the mouth of the mountain and flowed into the streams. It would have trickled through river valleys and truly made it look as if the world was burning. If you lived in a cave in Australia 7,000 years ago and saw such devastation, you'd make up legends about it too. The truly remarkable part is that the legends continued to be told for such a crazy long time. And now scientists have finally confirmed that Aboriginals really did see an eruption. Homer and the Trojan War. One of the most contested legends ever told is that of the Trojan War. Historians are divided on what truly happened between the Greeks and the people of Troy 3,500 years ago. This is a big one, so get ready to have your ears jammed full of exciting information. The first thing you need to know is that almost everything the experts know about Troy, the war, and the legendary Trojan horse comes from Homer. Homer is the one who wrote the story about the Trojan War in his book The Iliad, which was written around the 9th century BC. Homer himself is something of an enigma. Nobody knows where he came from or what his deal was. There are rumors that he was blind, or that he was born somewhere along the west coast of Turkey. Whatever the case, with Homer's works, the Iliad and the Odyssey, he became the most influential writer of the ancient world. Homer lived 500 years after the events in Troy allegedly took place. That single fact makes his reliability go down a lot. They didn't really have the best records 3,500 years ago, nor did Homer have the internet to look up details. If the people in this story were real, and if the events really happened, Homer could have learned of them through scrolls that were already ancient when he was born. Either that, or he would have learned their names through legends, which are hardly reliable. The details of the war you probably already know. The Prince of Troy, Paris, stole the wife of Menelaus, the king of Sparta, as his own. You know, the famous, beautiful Helen of Troy. This resulted in the Greeks launching a vengeful campaign against the Trojans that lasted 10 long years. The gods were involved, as were great heroes like Odysseus and Achilles. But in the end, the Greeks were unable to break through the walls of Troy. So they concocted a plan and sent in a hollow horse, known as the Trojan horse, with soldiers hidden inside. Then they snuck out of the horse at night and slaughtered the Trojans, thus ending the war. But did it really happen? The answer is a definite maybe. Historical records show that Alexander the Great stopped to visit the ruins of Troy on his way to Asia. For years after the war was finished, the region of Locris in Greece sent the priestesses to the Temple of Athena and ruined Troy to atone for the wrongdoing of their ancestors. Basically, it was an apology for war crimes. By the time Homer started writing his story, the Trojan War was already a well-established legend throughout the lands of Greece. But what about physical evidence? In the 19th century, German archaeologist Heinrich Schliemann uncovered ruins of what he believed to be the city of Troy in modern Turkey. Schliemann even claimed that he found treasure belonging to Helen, the stolen wife who kicked off the war in the first place. And subsequent excavations in the last few years have confirmed the site is almost definitely Troy. So it's clear that the city existed, but the exact details of the war are still shrouded in uncertainty. Many experts have suggested that Troy was raided by the Greek states in the 13th century BC. It wasn't an epic 10-year battle, but rather a brutal slaughter at the hands of raiders. St. Patrick. Every year on March 17th, people around the world dress in green to celebrate St. Patrick's Day. But are the legends about St. Patrick's true? Did he really banish the snakes from Ireland? St. Patrick's Day is all about parades, drinking green beer, and celebrating a history that most people know nothing about. The reason St. Patrick's Day is on the 17th of March is because that was when St. Patrick died in the 5th century AD. But did you know that St. Patrick wasn't even Irish? Patrick was born in Britain at the end of the 4th century AD. Then he was kidnapped by Irish raiders. Patrick was sold as a slave to a Celtic priest in Northern Ireland. He was forced to work as a shepherd for 6 years before he finally fled back to his home in Britain. He only returned to Ireland much later because he wanted to convert the locals. They were people he saw as godless savages. and his solution was to build a Christian missionary. He's celebrated in Ireland as a saint when all he really wanted was a slice of revenge, albeit some Christian revenge, for his unjust enslavement. The most well-known legend associated with St. Patrick is the one about the snakes. Patrick stood on a hill in the Irish countryside and demanded that all the serpents in Ireland slither their serpentine bodies into the sea. That's another big reason he's celebrated today. He was supposedly responsible for making the snakes leave, and you can't blame the Irish for being happy about that. But according to science, there were never any snakes in Ireland. In fact, not a single snake has ever been found in the fossil record. St. Patrick is one of the more bizarre examples of a figure whose legend people believe, but likely isn't true. Thanks for watching! Be sure to stay tuned for extra content you might have missed. Theseus and the Minotaur. Theseus and the Minotaur is one of the most famous stories in Greek mythology. For those who are unfamiliar with the tale, it starts with King Minos of Crete. He prayed to Poseidon for a snow-white bull after winning his kingship and exiling his brother. The bull was to be a sign of the god's approval. He was then supposed to sacrifice the bull when it appeared, but he found it too beautiful to kill, so he kept it. Poseidon was so furious that he caused the king's wife to fall in love with the bull, and she gave birth to a minotaur, a half-man, half-bull monster. As the minotaur grew older, it became more and more violent. Since it was neither man nor beast, it began to eat people. On advice from the oracle, the king built a massive labyrinth beneath the palace to hide the result of his wife's affair. King Minos' only human son was killed by the Athenians, so as revenge he continuously attacked them without mercy until they agreed to send 7 young men and 7 young women as tribute who would be sent down into the labyrinth as sacrifice for the Minotaur. Tired of this reign of terror, Theseus, son of King Aegeus, volunteered to go in order to slay the creature. The daughters of King Minos fell in love with him and decided to help him escape the deadly labyrinth. Princess Ariadne gave Prince Theseus a ball of thread to help him find his way. He slayed the Minotaur and was able to get back out, taking the other Athenians and the princesses with him. But how much of this legend is true? The palace of King Minos was discovered by Sir Arthur Evans in 1894. We know it today as the Palace of Knossos. What's truly spectacular is that underneath the palace, archaeologists found the ruins of an extremely complex labyrinth. The labyrinth, before being abandoned and left to crumble, was so elaborate that it would have almost been impossible to find your way out without a map. Now, we don't know that Theseus was a real hero, and it's doubtful that a minotaur was ever a real creature. But archaeologists have proven that both the palace and the labyrinth were real, giving quite a bit of credibility to this myth. The Legend of Mulan. Mulan is well known these days as a popular Disney animated film, one that was so well loved they recently made the live-action version as well. But what a lot of fans don't know is that the character Mulan is actually based on a Chinese ballad. What's even more interesting is that the ballad may actually be based on a real person named Mulan from Chinese history. The earliest written evidence of Mulan being a real person dates back to the northern dynasties between 386 and 581 AD. The Ballad of Mulan is no more than 300 words, describing the story of a girl who dresses up like a man to join the army instead of her father. It's the exact same story as the movie. At the end of the ballad, Mulan is celebrated as one of the best and most powerful warriors, and then she reveals herself to actually be a woman. While there isn't any direct evidence of this happening, the ballad does give some clues. The epic poem mentions 2 main locations, the Yellow River and the Yan Mountain. This suggests that Mulan's hometown was somewhere near these 2 landmarks. The poem also suggests that Mulan was a member of the nomadic group called the Tuoba, a clan that came from northern China and established the Northern Wei dynasty. This is because in the poem, the emperor goes by the title Khan, making it likely that Mulan came from a nomadic society descended from the splintered Mongols. These people were known for giving women a respected status in society, whereas this kind of behavior was eventually lost in China. So Mulan may have actually been real, remembered and passed down through poetry.
The Battle of Salamis. The Battle of Salamis is one of the most legendary battles in history. Fought between the Persians and the Greeks in September of 480 BC, it was one of the most important military battles in ancient history, and a pivotal point for Europe. If the Greeks had lost this fight, the Persians would have successfully invaded and altered history as we know it today. The battle took place just off the coast of Attica in Greece. While we do know that the battle itself definitely happened, we don't know how many of the legends surrounding it are true. It's said that the Greek city-states fought as allies, bringing 370 ships to battle, but the Persians had over 1,000 ships. King Xerxes assumed that he would annihilate the Greek fleet thanks to his overwhelming numbers. But what apparently happened was that the Greek commander Themistocles lured the Persian ships through the Strait of Salamis, just like in the movie 300, except on boats. The huge fleet couldn't fit through the strait, which led to chaos and disorganization, and the much smaller fleet of 370 Greek ships brought them all down. This definitely could have happened, but we don't know for sure if these numbers are real. Perhaps it was a brilliant battle strategy. Perhaps the ever-powerful and mysterious Greek fire gave the ships the upper hand. If the legendary accounts from the battle are true, then it just goes to show how mighty and good at battle tactics the ancient Greeks really were. The Lost Labyrinth of Egypt. Did you know that there is a mysterious lost wonder in Egypt that could have even surpassed the Great Pyramids themselves? The Great Lost Labyrinth of Egypt first appears in writings from the Greek historian Herodotus in the 5th century BC. He himself claimed that he saw the building, calling it even more impressive than the pyramids of Giza. The Greek historian also claimed that the labyrinth was located along the shores of a massive lake over 7 days from the pyramids. There was a great temple divided into huge sections to make up the labyrinth, which was almost inescapable. There were subterranean passages, colossal figures, and even small pyramids entwined with the other structures. It was a massive complex unlike anything else in the ancient world, or even since. Legend says the labyrinth was so big that once you became lost, the only way to find your way out was with a secret map or a book. Unfortunately, this great labyrinth has never actually been discovered by modern archaeologists. We aren't sure if it truly existed. There were some vague reports back in 2008 that radar specialists had uncovered an underground labyrinth beneath a temple near Cairo. But this supposed discovery was never authenticated or investigated further, or at least nothing has been published yet. While it's definitely possible that the Egyptians built a labyrinth that would make their pyramids look like children's toys, evidence to support this ancient legend is yet to be discovered. Pelle, the volcano goddess. Pelle is the goddess of Kilauea in Hawaii, ruler of fire and volcanoes. According to Hawaiian legend, Pelle arrived in Hawaii after being kicked out of her homeland in Tahiti. She crossed the ocean in a canoe, but her sister was in hot pursuit because Pelle had messed around with her husband. Pelle's sister nearly killed her, but she survived by digging giant fire pits, what we know of today as Hawaii's many volcanoes. Pelle's sister eventually learned she was still alive and went back to finish the job. Through all the fighting, the great forests of Hawaii were burned down. Pelle's sister killed her in the end, and Pelle became a goddess. There are a lot of different iterations of this story, but the foundations remain the same. And while these goddesses never physically existed, some parts of the story may have actually happened, specifically the forest being burned by the volcanoes. Scientists know today that lava flowed continuously for over 60 years in the 15th century, covering a massive part of Hawaii in lava. The local Polynesians may have interpreted what they saw as a great battle between gods, making up their own legends about it. These legends persisted, became myth, and have mostly now been forgotten. Even though Pelle herself probably never existed, this is a great example of how real events inspire stories, which can turn into legends and even turn into religions. And now for an amazing creature we all wish was still around. But first, wanted to give a big shout out to Nathan Sama and Jessica Greening, who has been around practically since the beginning. Thanks so much for watching, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already to join the Origins Explained family. Unicorns. Unicorns were once very real animals. There is a reason why unicorns have been prevalent in mythologies throughout the East and West for thousands of years. But the catch is a little creepy. Unicorns probably didn't start out as white horses with golden horns that contained magical powers. They also probably didn't have tears that could heal the wounded or blood that could grant immortality. Instead, the unicorn was probably a furry rhinoceros that went extinct sometime around 29,000 years ago. National Geographic reports that the fossilized skull of a fuzzy rhinoceros was discovered in Kazakhstan, with a single horn protruding from its head. The beast was over 4 tons, over 12 feet long, and probably around 6 feet tall. It would have been absolutely massive and a real source of inspiration for Neolithic people. It's highly possible that our ancestors lived alongside these mysterious rhinoceros-like creatures for several thousand years. After they went extinct, stories about these majestic creatures continued. This is why all over the world, unicorns are seen slightly differently in ancient legends. Sometimes the unicorn is a deer, sometimes a donkey, and sometimes a goat. The only consistent attribute is a single horn sticking out of its forehead. What are your thoughts on the legendary unicorn? Do you think it was a fuzzy rhinoceros, or was it inspired by something else? Let me know in the comments below, and remember to subscribe if you haven't already. The 12 Labors of Hercules. Hercules is arguably the most famous legendary hero that we still talk about today. And according to historians, he was likely a real person. He probably wasn't the son of Zeus, and it's unlikely that he ever fought a hydra or killed a chimera. But his famous 12 labors may have actually been done by someone during the Stone Age. Hercules had many enemies before he was even born. Zeus had an affair with a mortal, and when his wife Hera found out, she set out to destroy baby Hercules. As he grew up, he married and had children, but Hera cast an evil spell on him and made him murder his own family. Hercules went to Apollo and begged for punishment, and so to atone for his sins, Apollo ordered him to perform 12 labors for the Mycenaean king. They included fighting monsters, cleaning stables, and stealing cattle from a giant. One of his greatest enemies was the Nemean lion, an exceptionally strong and murderous lion. Then there was the Hydra, a 9-headed venomous snake monster. Historians say there may have been an extraordinarily strong warrior from the Stone Age who accomplished many extraordinary feats. But instead of killing monsters, he had probably slain a very large lion, maybe captured a bunch of snakes, and stole cattle from a rival tribe. Through the centuries, the story of Hercules and his 12 labors was picked up by other civilizations and passed on and on. Everybody loves a hero. The original hero may have been an ordinary guy with a club and some lion fur, and perhaps he was lucky, and so people thought the gods were with him. The Great Flood. Scientists agree that there was once a great flood that blanketed many parts of the world in water. This flood happened at the dawn of modern history, devastating the region of Mesopotamia. Back during excavations in 1928, archaeologists at a pair of ancient sites, Ur and Kish, uncovered evidence of flood deposits. There was definitely some flooding in Mesopotamia at the dawn of civilization, and the flooding had probably affected other places as well, all around the Mediterranean. This shared experience was then passed down from generation to generation. According to Robert Ballard, one of the best underwater archaeologists on the planet, 12,000 years ago the world was covered in ice. In Connecticut, the ice was about a mile high, and this went all the way up to the North Pole. So when all this ice started to melt at the end of the Ice Age, it caused the world's sea levels to rise, leading to the Great Flooding of Mesopotamia. But now for the big question. Does all this flooding directly correlate to the story of Noah and his ark in the Bible? Was the Great Biblical Flood a very real thing? This is one legend with a shocking amount of truth. While there are still archaeologists out searching for the ark that Noah built, it is clear that a great flood devastated the world just as humanity was getting started. Number 2. The Oracle. The Oracle of Delphi was one of the most important women in the ancient world of Greece. She was a priestess at the Temple of Apollo who practiced divination, or seeing the future. One of the biggest mistakes people make when thinking about the Oracle is that she was just one person. This simply isn't true. There were many oracles, each one a real woman selected by priests at the sanctuary of Delphi to foretell the future at the temple. They were actually known as Pythia, and when one died, another would take her place. Thanks to historical records and archaeological evidence, we know there really were oracles, and that the Greeks took their visions of the future very seriously. But unlike the myths, they probably didn't actually have special powers. Scientists believe that the Temple of Apollo, where the oracle gave her proclamations, was built over a ground fissure. It was from this fissure that gases rose up from deep within the earth. When the oracle inhaled these fumes, she went into a kind of trance. But not because the gods were speaking to her, but because she was getting affected by the toxic fumes. What the ancient people saw as a state of divine ecstasy has a scientific explanation. But back in ancient times, science and the divine were one. Heat and gas escaping from dark caves and cracks in the ground implied that it was the entrance to the underworld, and who was to say any different? King Arthur. King Arthur may have been a real person, and may have even sat at a round table in Camelot. There has been debate raging for centuries among historians as to Arthur's existence. His first appearance in written history was around the year 1000. The Welsh historian Nennius published a list of 12 epic battles that King Arthur had fought in. He was supposedly a Celtic hero who helped defend Wales against the invading Saxon armies. And, kind of like Hercules, his original mentions in history were pretty boring. He was basically a really good king who fought a lot of battles. But by the 12th century, Arthur had a magic sword called Excalibur, a wizard named Merlin, and a whole group of trusted knights. Somewhere along the way, somebody who may have been a real person turned into a character from a storybook. But there are some problems with the stories, like the fact that the 12 battles Arthur was supposedly involved in took place over so many different times that it would have been impossible for him to participate in all of them. Then there's the issue with Camelot, his legendary castle. While there are about half a dozen mysterious strongholds across the Welsh and English border that could have been Camelot, none of them have ever been authenticated. King Arthur may really have been a king, or he may have just been a character thought up by a Welsh historian 1,000 years ago. The truth is that we just don't know.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to stay tuned for extra content you might have missed.
The Dog Boy of Quitman. The historic town of Quitman, Arkansas is home to many ghost-related urban legends, including one describing a werewolf-like madman who haunts a house on Mulberry Street, where in 2005, the owners reported seeing a large, weird-looking man with long brown hair, creepy eyes, and great big arms and hands. The terrifying entity held a cat in his arms and glared as he charged toward the homeowner, only to quickly disappear from view. This eyewitness account spurred rumors of the so-called Dog Boy, whose glowing eyes were allegedly spotted peering out through the home's windows at night. The Dog Boy legend is more or less an exaggerated version of the real-life story of Gerald Bettis, a troubled boy who was born in 1954 to parents Floyd and Aline. From the start, Gerald was a difficult child, according to local resident Mary Nell Hollibird, who referred to the boy as a brat, vicious and cruel in an interview with the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette. His nickname, Dog Boy, reportedly stems from the boy's tendency to capture and torture stray cats and dogs. We could hear them howl, Hollibird claimed. In addition to the apparent early onset of sadistic tendencies, little Gerald was bullied at school, where kids took his belongings and responded to the boy's attempts to gain attention by aggravating him. As Gerald got older, reaching a height of 6'4" and a weight of 300 pounds, his cruelty supposedly worsened. He kept his parents virtually imprisoned in the upstairs part of that house, Hollibird said. He would feed them, but only when he decided it was time for them to eat. Others claim that Gerald routinely beat his father, once going as far as throwing the man out an upstairs window. As the story goes, Gerald's dad clung to the ledge until law enforcement arrived. When the elder Bettis passed away in 1981 from what was described in his obituary as an illness, many speculated that Gerald had actually shoved his father down the stairs. It's difficult to distinguish which pieces of the disturbing Dog Boy legend are true, including the alleged sightings of Gerald's ghost, but all signs point toward the story being rooted in reality to some degree. The Leaping Lawyer. A story known to circulate throughout Toronto describes a lawyer who enjoyed running up to the windows in his high-rise office and throwing his full weight against them to demonstrate their strength. The man's bizarre party trick allegedly caught up with him one day when, while showing off to colleagues, he barreled into a window and unexpectedly crashed through it and plunged to his death. On the surface, this strange story certainly seems like an urban legend. After all, who in their right mind would take their chances in such a potentially deadly way? But this tale is mostly true, save for small nuances. Gary Hoy, a senior partner at a Toronto law firm, had an affinity for slamming his 160-pound frame against the windows of the 24th floor practice. I mean, gotta test the strength of the structure somehow. On July 9, 1993, he demonstrated the stunt for visiting law students. While Hoy's first attempt went as usual, his second go caused the window to finally give way, and he fatally plummeted to the pavement below. The North Pond Hermit. For decades, items belonging to vacationers in central Maine's North Pond area, such as flashlights, batteries, food, and other necessities, went missing from cabins and campsites. Oddly, books also disappeared from people's belongings, sparking rumors of a forest-dwelling thief who routinely swiped supplies from unsuspecting visitors. It sounds silly, especially since anyone who's traveled knows how easy it is to forget and lose things in the process, making it easy to write off a missing item as being unintentionally misplaced or left behind. But gossip became fact in 2013 when police arrested a man named Christopher Knight for burglarizing a cabin in the North Pond area. To their shock, Knight had spent the last 27 years living alone in the forest, relying on stolen goods to survive. He admitted to committing over 1,000 burglaries throughout that time. Knight left his Massachusetts home in 1986 at 20 years old, drove his car until it ran out of gas, and settled in the secluded woods of Maine in a tent, where he remained isolated from the outside world for nearly 3 decades until he was caught stealing from an empty summer camp for the disabled. To this day, writer Michael Finkel is the only person out of hundreds or more requests from journalists to score an interview with Knight. He detailed their interactions in his book, Stranger in the Woods, offering a one-of-a-kind look into the hermit's mind. The legend of Polybius. Starting in the early 2000s, rumors began circulating among avid gamers about an arcade game that existed in Portland, Oregon during the early 1980s called Polybius, which reportedly caused players to experience disturbing side effects. Legend holds that the game, which was contained within an entirely black cabinet, caused symptoms such as amnesia, game addiction, nausea, and even suicidal contemplation. Even more strangely, serious-looking men wearing black allegedly visited the machine periodically, collecting information from it and disappearing without explanation, leading people to speculate that Polybius was part of a government-run, top-secret psychological experiment. A month after debuting, Polybius supposedly disappeared without a trace. An investigation by Skeptoid podcast host Brian Dunning revealed that while the legend of Polybius isn't entirely true, bits and pieces of it reflect real-life events. For example, in 1981, a 12-year-old boy became sick during a 28-hour video game marathon in Portland, but from drinking too much soda, rather than the video game itself. Days later, federal agents raided Portland area arcades, seizing games that were suspected of being used for illegal gambling. And in 1985, a video game called Polyplay was created, and these factors apparently culminated into the Polybius legend. Cropsy. Several decades ago, kids from all over Staten Island knew about the legend of Cropsy, a boogeyman-like figure who lurked in the woods near an abandoned hospital and spent his free time kidnapping and disemboweling children during the night. Naturally, parents reassured their terrified kids that no such being existed. But what the adults initially wrote off as nothing more than an urban legend designed to give children nightmares caught widespread attention for having possibly truthful origins after someone abducted a mentally handicapped girl from the Willowbrook area in 1987. During the chief suspect's trial, Andre Rand, it became evident that children had mysteriously vanished from Willowbrook since the 1970s, around the time when the Willowbrook State School for the Mentally Handicapped closed, according to an AV Club article detailing a documentary that was made about Rand and the Cropsy legend. Rand, a former employee of the facility, was convicted of the abduction. He denied involvement in the other cases, but his sincerity in proclaiming his innocence is questionable for obvious reasons. Charlie No-Face. During the 1950s and 60s in the Pittsburgh area of western Pennsylvania, stories abounded of a character that goes by the names of Charlie No-Face and the Green Man. The terrifying legends claim that a horribly disfigured man, left faceless and glowing with a greenish hue after an industrial accident, haunts a tunnel and stalks remote streets in the middle of the night. Sounds like your typical horror story / urban legend, right? But Charlie No-Face was a real person, a man named Raymond Robinson, who was tragically burned by a high-voltage electric wire in 1919 when he was just 8 years old. Robinson miraculously survived the accident, retaining his ability to speak and hear despite his injuries, which saw his nose, lips, ears, and eyes all either gone or misshapen. For the remainder of his life, the man lived at his family home in Coppell, Pennsylvania, where he handcrafted wallets, doormats, and other goods for a modest living. Even Robinson's family alienated him to some degree, eating meals separately from him and eventually modifying their garage into a separate apartment for him. To avoid frightening people with his appearance, Robinson typically only left home at night, using that time to take walks along Route 351 and through Piney Fork Tunnel, later nicknamed the Green Man Tunnel. As people spotted Robinson during his solitary nighttime strolls, the story of the Green Man took firm hold throughout the region. People began seeking out Robinson, which worked in his favor when it came to well-intending but curious people who were happy to share a beer and smoke with him, offering the socially deprived man a rare opportunity to interact with other humans. But many took to harassing the man who had experienced a difficult enough life in the first place, according to Thrillist writer Will Fulton, whose father claimed to have met the Green Man. Although Robinson passed away from natural causes in 1985 at age 74, his legend persists, remaining a hot topic among the area's high school thrill seekers. Bodies underneath beds. One popular urban legend, which you may have heard before, tells of hotel visitors, usually a couple, noticing an unbearable stench coming from inside the mattress or underneath the bed and discovering human remains. A core element of the story involves the obvious fact that in situations like this, a person most likely did not die from natural causes, but instead met foul play. Stories along these lines have proven true numerous times, as evidenced by at least a dozen cases confirmed by Snopes. The most surprising instances involved hotel guests who didn't detect the stench of death immediately or ignored it and spent the night unknowingly sleeping over a dead body. In 1999, a German couple did exactly that at the Burgundy Motor Inn in Atlantic City, New Jersey. They noticed a putrid odor in the room, but waited until the next day to complain to management, leading to the discovery of a murdered 64-year-old man named Saul Hernandez. Another horrifying example happened at the Budget Inn in Memphis, Tennessee in 2010, when a couple named James and Rhonda Sargent visited 2 days after a local woman, Sunny Milbrook, was reported missing. Milbrook had stayed at the hotel for several weeks with her children before she vanished, yet authorities somehow failed to thoroughly inspect the room she stayed in. Meanwhile, the Sargents, who stayed on and off for several weeks themselves, combated a stank aroma, even burning incense to try masking it, but to no avail. They noticed dryer sheets stuffed into the ceiling tiles, suggesting that someone else had tried covering up the sickening smell. The room was rented out at least 3 times before Milbrook's decomposing remains were finally discovered. These are just 2 examples of an urban legend that, unlike many others, has repeatedly turned out to be true. Fake cop trick. Another popular theme among urban legends involves stories of dangerous individuals posing as police officers to access victims. In these tales, the phony cop usually drives an unmarked car and gives off the impression that they are working undercover or in plain clothes. Once opportunity strikes, the fake deputy attacks their victim. Unfortunately, this type of situation is far from fictional. In fact, documented cases of predators pretending to be police officers seem to hit the headlines alarmingly often. For example, in July 2018, a car used flashing lights to pull someone over in McLean County, Illinois. The suspect, a thin white male in his 40s, approached the vehicle and attempted to subdue the victim, who luckily managed to escape. Sadly, not everyone is this lucky. On a lighter note, sometimes a person's fake cop scheme backfires on them. Take, for example, an incident that happened earlier this year when Oakland County, Michigan Sheriff Michael Bouchard pulled over a black SUV equipped with flashing lights and a Blue Lives Matter license plate, covered in decals bearing sayings such as Police Interceptor, Dial 911, and Emergency Services. The driver, a mechanic, claimed that his vehicle was decked out like so because he occasionally helps the police, whatever that means. The real police didn't buy the fake cop story, and he was arrested and booked into jail on suspicion of impersonating an officer. As humorous as this incident can be, a search of the culprit's vehicle revealed an illegally owned .45 semi-automatic handgun, as well as a large knife, reminding us of the very real dangers and questionable intentions of ordinary citizens pretending to be members of law enforcement. Body or movie prop. There are several variations of an urban legend about a real human corpse accidentally being used as a movie or amusement park prop, and these tales ring surprisingly true. A wannabe outlaw named Elmer McCurdy died in 1911 in a drunken shootout with an angry sheriff's posse after robbing $46 and 2 jugs of whiskey from a train in Oklahoma. McCurdy's embalmed corpse instantly became a sideshow attraction, first being propped up in the corner of the funeral home, where visitors dropped nickels into the mouth of the bandit who wouldn't give up, as he was called. In 1915, 2 men appeared at the funeral parlor claiming to be McCurdy's brothers and stating their intentions to give the man a proper burial. The men were actually carnival promoters who displayed McCurdy throughout Texas under the same claim to fame that the funeral parlor in Oklahoma had advertised. McCurdy's remains changed hands several times over the ensuing decades. He appeared at an amusement park near Mount Rushmore, was exhibited at a wax museum in Los Angeles, featured in several low-budget films, displayed in a fun house at New Pike Amusement Park in Long Beach, California, and ultimately used as a prop in the 1976 television series $6 Million Man. While filming the show's 4th season at the Funhouse in Long Beach, the director attempted to adjust what he thought was a prop resembling a human corpse that was spray-painted orange and suspended from a hangman's noose, only to discover upon accidentally dislodging McCurdy's arm that the body was, in fact, very real. The unintentionally amputated appendage bore unmistakable evidence of human bones surrounded by muscle tissue. The bandit who wouldn't give up was finally laid to rest in April 1977 at Summit View Cemetery in Guthrie, Oklahoma, where 2 cubic yards of cement were poured over his grave under the state medical examiner's orders to prevent the body from reappearing in the entertainment industry.
Thanks for watching! Be sure to stay tuned for extra content you might have missed.
Theane the Dragon Slayer. Disney princesses better move over because Theane is ready to slay the dragon herself. Theane was the daughter of a great chief of the Basotho people. Sadly, her father died, and she became the one responsible for taking care of her 2 brothers, who apparently were lazy and vain. She sent them to warrior school, but upon graduation, they refused to leave, claiming that as the sons of a great chief, they must have armor and shields made from the skin of a Nana Bolele. A Nana Bolele is a fearsome water-dwelling dragon that always arrives in a cloud of red smoke, but their skin glows in the dark, and those who have special things made from their skin will be more powerful. In order to support her brothers, she gathered the bravest Basotho to hunt for the Nana Bolele, but they didn't know where he was. Although why she didn't just send her brothers is beyond me, but she must be the brave one in the family. They arrived to a river and threw in some meat while Theane sung a song to see if they could draw out the dragon. Instead, a frog appeared and told them to keep going until they could dip water with the husk of the poison plant. Then there they must cross. So the group led by Theane kept going. In every body of water they would toss in meat and sing. Each time an amphibian would tell them to keep going. Finally they arrived to a wide river and threw in an entire ox. Then the river started bubbling. Prepared to finally confront the Nana Bolele, they drew their weapons, but this time an old woman emerged. She took them underwater to her deserted village to show them what the Nana Bolele had done. It had eaten everyone there, except for her because her skin was too tough from working hard her whole life. The Nana Bolele then forced her to take care of it, but she was tired, so she agreed to help Theane. She hid the Basotho people in a hole, and they waited for the Nana Bolele to come back. An entire herd of them came, and although they couldn't find the humans, they could smell them and they grew angry. But since they were tired from hunting all day, they fell asleep and Theane went to the biggest sleeping water dragon and slayed it. As they went to leave, the old lady gave them a magic pebble. The Basotho went to return home, led by Theane, but the other Nana Bolele wanted revenge and came after them with their cloud of red smoke behind them. Theane threw the magic pebble, which turned into an enormous mountain. It blocked the Nana Bolele, who finally gave up. When they arrived home, Theane made sure that her brothers got shields, blankets, hats, clothes, and shoes made out of the skin. In thanks, they gave their sister 100 cattle, and they lived happily ever after. Would you go to all of this work to make your family happy? Let me know in the comments below. Captain Van Hunks. The legend of Jan Van Hunks is one of the many stories about the mountains that overlook the city of Cape Town. Jan Van Hunks was a retired 18th century sea captain, an avid tobacco smoker who lived on Table Mountain with his wife. Every morning, he traveled up to nearby Devil's Peak and smoked his pipe while admiring the surrounding views. One day, Van Hunks encountered a strange-looking man who asked him for a light and challenged him to a smoking competition. Van Hunks accepted the challenge, and the two men filled their pipes, lit up, and puffed away. The cloud of smoke grew so thick it blanketed the top of the mountain like a tablecloth, much like the heavy cloud that rolls in when Cape Town's famous southeaster is blowing. Although, according to the legend, it's the leftover smoke from Jan Van Hunk and the stranger's smoking competition. Anyway, back to the contest. To the stranger's surprise, Van Hunk outsmoked him. As he angrily stumbled away, Van Hunk caught a glimpse of a barbed red tail sticking out from under his coat. Only then did the man realize that he'd been smoking with the devil, after whom Devil's Peak was named. The Watcher of the South. The legend of the Watcher of the South is the story of the creation of Tabletop Mountain. The world's creator, Kamata, began forming land over the seas while making the planet. In doing so, he attracted the jealousy of Nganyamba, the great dragon of the sea. To stop Kamata from completing his work, Nganyamba continuously battled him. Kamata was unable to protect his newly created land from the dragon on his own. His mother, the earth goddess Jobela, created 4 giants to guard the north, south, east, and west corners of the earth and to keep the dragon at bay. She placed the mightiest giant, Umlindi Wemengizimu, at the gateway to the south, in what is now Cape Town. Nganyamba refused to back down to the giants and fought many battles with them, taking them down one by one. As they took their last breaths, the giants appealed to Jobela with one final wish. They wanted her to transform them into mountains so they could continue protecting the world even after death. Umlindi Wemengizimu became Table Mountain, or the Watcher of the South. Gagarib. The Gagarib is an irritating, man-eating, demonic monster that originated in the mythology of the indigenous San or San tribe, also known as the Bushmen. This diabolical creature sits on the edge of a large pit and attempts to lure people in by taunting them with challenges to throw rocks at it. Those who are unable to resist the invite soon discover that the rocks they throw bounce right off the Gagarib's body. By then, it's too late. The ricocheting rock hits the person, causing them to fall into the pit where the demon devours them. The story's hero, Hatsi initially refuses to throw a stone at the Gagarib, waiting until the demon turns away before hurling a rock at it. Upon being hit, the Gagarib tumbles helplessly into his own pit. Another version of the tale holds that the Gagarib repeatedly throws Hatsi into the pit, but he escapes every time and eventually secures victory by throwing the Gagarib into the pit. All's well that ends well. The Ghost of Tokai Manor. The historic Tokai Manor house is located in the Tokai Forest in Cape Town and was built in 1796. At the time, it was considered the Cape Peninsula's most magnificent homestead. A man named Petrus Michael Ekstein owned the manor house during the early 1800s. He frequently threw upscale banquets, and the night tragedy struck at the house was no exception. During a New Year's Eve celebration, Ekstein dared his son Frederick to ride his horse up the home's steep staircase and into the dining room. Frederick took on his father's challenge, and guests watched excitedly as he entered the dining room on horseback and circled around. Frederick's horse tripped and tumbled during the steep descent back down the stairs, and both horse and rider fell to their deaths. Since then, visitors have reported seeing the pair in and around Tokai Manor. People also claim to hear neighing and laughing at night from within the home, and forestry workers have witnessed a horse galloping toward the manor during the early morning hours, carrying a rider in noticeably outdated clothing. Supernatural experiences are more or less expected on New Year's Eve, when Frederick's ghost tries repeating the foolish stunt that claimed his life, along with that of his horse. Mermaids of the Karu. Much of western South Africa is covered in a vast, semi-arid desert called the Karu, which is divided into a large dry northern section called the Groot Karu and a smaller southern region called the Klein Karu. Many people have reported seeing mermaids brushing their hair along a mountainside pool in the Klein Karu. But the area was last underwater 250 million years ago, begging the question of what these mermaids would possibly be doing in the middle of the desert. When ocean levels fell and waters receded from the Klein Karu, they left behind a fertile valley nestled between 3 mountain ranges, with springs and underground caverns where the mermaids sought refuge. These marine maidens are fair-skinned with red eyes and long black hair, and are sinister in nature, like most mermaids. They love to convince their victim that they can have whatever they want, kind of like a genie, only to drag the person into the water and drown them. Rock paintings by the Khoisan people show humans with fish-like tails, suggesting that the legend of the Karu mermaids dates back several centuries, at least. In 1996, massive floods swept through the region's Meiring Sport mountain pass, wiping away villages, people, and livestock. The devastating event gave rise to a new legend about the Karu mermaids, in which they're flash flood victims who are swept out to sea and later return to the desert to recuperate. The Witch of the Hex River Valley. In the Afrikaans language, the word hex, or hex with an X, means witch. The Hex River Valley is situated in the Western Cape and is surrounded by mountains. The highest nearby peak is called Matroosberg. For decades, people have reported sightings of a beautiful young woman in a white nightgown who wanders along the lower crags in the moonlight, wailing and wringing her hands. Eliza Meiring lived during the mid-19th century on her parents' farm in the valley. She had a reputation for being vain and shamelessly enjoyed the power she gleaned from having an ample selection of admirers. Don't we all? According to legend, Meiring instructed her suitor, Franz, to retrieve a red flower from high in the mountains to prove his love for her. As soon as the young man picked the flower, he fell to his death. Eliza was grief-stricken and felt both guilty and remorseful for her role in the tragedy. Suspecting she was unstable and a danger to herself, her parents locked her up. One night, Eliza snuck out and fell to her own death while walking the same path Franz had taken to pick the flower. Since then, her ghost has walked the hills of Matroosberg in an eternal, inconsolable state of grief and distress. Tokoloshe, also called the Tikoloshe, Davian, or Hili, the Tokoloshe is an evil dwarf-like water spirit of Zulu or Xhosa mythology. Ill-intending humans looking to cause problems for others call upon this mischievous entity for help. The Tokoloshe's activities range from simply scaring their victims to causing illness or even death. It enters people's homes and attacks them at night and can become invisible simply by drinking water. This creature emerged in indigenous South African folklore, perhaps as an explanation for why people mysteriously passed away at night while asleep in their rondavels. Rondavels are the westernized version of an African-style round hut with a conical roof. This creature has been credited with inspiring members of the Zulu culture to sleep in beds raised off the floor. Around the time the legend emerged, people on the Highveld, an inland plateau sitting at altitudes between 4,100 to 6,900 feet, slept near fires on the floors of their huts to keep warm. The fires depleted their oxygen supply, especially near the floor, as carbon dioxide is heavier than air and sinks. People soon learned that sleeping off the ground was a life-saving measure that enabled them to escape the Tokoloshe's wrath. The Flying Dutchman. The Flying Dutchman is a legendary ghost ship whose captain and crew will spend eternity unsuccessfully trying to navigate the vessel to port. Time and time again, the ship is blown back by storms, but its dedicated crew will never give up, despite their efforts being in vain. Tales of the Flying Dutchman likely date back to the 17th century, when the Dutch East India Company was in its heyday. People began reporting sightings of the eerie ghost vessel as early as 1790, and its legend evolved over time. According to one story, the Flying Dutchman crew sailed toward the Cape while fleeing bad weather, but were unable to receive help piloting to shore and perished. In 1803, Scottish writer John Leyden suggested that the ship's crew had committed some sort of atrocity. As punishment, they were stricken with pestilence and doomed to never reach shore. Soon enough, tales emerged of people spotting the Flying Dutchman in places other than the Western Cape, including the North Atlantic and off the Australian coast. Sometimes the vessel appeared in a thick, dark cloud, then vanished right before a witness's eyes. The probable explanation is that these sightings are caused by mirages, or a phenomenon known as looming. These optical illusions cause vessels to reflect eerily in ways where they could be easily mistaken for ghost ships. The Leopard, the Ram, and the Jackal. The Leopard, the Ram, and the Jackal is a humorous fable about a fierce leopard being afraid of a harmless ram, and his friend, a jackal, challenging him to face his fears. It goes something like this. Once upon a time, there were two friends, Jackal and Leopard, who lived next door to each other. As Leopard walked alone through the jungle on his way home from hunting one day, he encountered a large, horned creature he didn't recognize. Leopard cautiously asked for the animal's name, to which the creature replied, "I am Ram. Who might you be?" spotted one, while thumping his chest in an attempted display of power. "I am Leopard," the feline replied timidly before fleeing the scene and dashing home as quickly as possible. When he arrived home, the frightened Leopard explained what he had just seen to Jackal while trying to catch his breath. Jackal laughed and said, "You are indeed a silly fellow, Leopard, to leave behind such a sweet piece of meat. However, tomorrow we shall search for the ram and feast upon him together." As planned, Leopard and Jackal set out together the next day in search of Ram, who saw the pair approaching and warned his wife, telling her that they couldn't possibly match the pair's strength. "Yes, but they cannot match our wit," Ram's wife replied. She sent him back out into the open with their son, with instructions to pinch the little ram as the Jackal and Leopard approached. Ram followed his wife's orders and pinched his son, who made a sound that was all too familiar to Leopard, that of a hungry child. Leopard's eyes widened as he thought of his own cubs and impulsively turned to run away. Jackal held Leopard back with a leather cord he'd somehow tied around his friend's leg without him noticing. Ram pinched his son again, and the little one's cries drew his wife outside. She thanked Jackal for bringing the family a leopard to feed their hungry child. With that, Leopard rushed home, dragging Jackal helplessly behind him, and the friends never hunted together again. Thanks for watching! Which story was your favorite? And what other parts of the world would you like to learn about? Let me know in the comments below, and while you're at it, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. See you later! Bye!